This is GARIS Masculist MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 406, entitled, "How will feminists react to the Masculist Onslaught?" Description. This video speculates on how feminists will react when the masculists, armed with their masculist ideas and rhetoric, commence an onslaught against them in the universities, in the media, etc. Feminists have had a monopoly on gender politics for half a century, so it will come as a real cognitive dissonant shock when masculists not only hit them back, but intellectually crush them with masculist science, beating the MFBs, that's monoconscious feminazi bigots, with their own gender political medicine, then dominating the gender political stage that feminists have not had to share for half a century. The gender political tables are about to be turned on their heads by angry, politically active masculists. The flyer itself. Transfer a couple of images. How will feminists react to the Masculist Onslaught? By Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. This flyer tries to predict ahead of time how feminists and women in general will react when the masculist onslaught comes. I need to explain what I mean by the masculist onslaught. For the past few years in the manosphere, that's in brackets men talking about men's issues on the internet, there's been a growing anger at women, and particularly feminists, for what they are doing in the divorce courts. A divorcing father will lose custody of his kids with a 90% probability. Thus, any man who marries and has kids will face a 1 chance in 4 of losing his kids, which is so unacceptable that in many countries now, two-thirds of young men refuse to marry and reject paternity, since only a fool or an ignoramus would accept the odds of 1 chance in 4 of losing his kids. Divorcing husbands are forced by these fluffy feminist-controlled divorce courts to pay child support to kids he will barely see. He will lose his house to his ex-wife, so she can raise her kids in it. He will lose half his wealth and stuff to her. He may have to pay her alimony if she is a real fluffy, a traditional woman who expects to be able to parasite off the money and labour of a man. The fluffy feminists are seen as hypocrites by the masculists, men's libbers, because these feminists want equal rights with men in the parliaments, but reject equal obligations with men in the divorce courts, behaving as fluffies, expecting men to pay for them after divorce the way they did before the divorce. Modern marriage so sucks for men that there are now millions of MGTOWs around the world, in brackets MGTOW, MGTOW equals men going their own way. That is, men who refuse to marry, reject paternity, and spend their money on themselves. Probably within a decade, if the divorce courts are not soon men-fared, then over 90% of young men will be MGTOWs, who may date and sex women, but will steadfastly refuse to marry them and give them their sperm. Already, many alpha males, that is, the really attractive ones, the tall, dark, handsome, rich, powerful, confident, humorous, intelligent men, the type of men women really want to mate with to obtain the superior DNA from a superior man for her kids, so that her kids have DNA superior to hers, which is good for the species, so evolved. This tendency of women to mate up is called hypergamy, an instinct that all women have. Since the alpha males are more intelligent than average males, they are the first to go MGTOW or become masculists, just as it was with the rise of feminism in the late 60s and early 70s. The first feminists were usually university students. Now, with second and third wave feminism being half a century old, there's been enough time for feminist ideas to have penetrated to the masses, the millions. Even working class women now have absorbed feminist ideas. The elite males are now rapidly absorbing MGTOW and masculist ideas to such a point that young women are really starting to panic, since they are observing that the elite males they really want to mate with, to have kids by, are increasingly refusing to give these women their sperm, seeing marriage as toxic, because divorce is toxic, thanks to the fluffy feminist hypocritical control of the divorce courts. The masculists are now telling these alarmed young women that the primary reason why quality men are refusing to give these young women their sperm is because these quality men utterly reject running the risk of losing their kids with one chance in 4, and refuse to be financially massacred and have their lives destroyed in the fluffy feminist-controlled divorce courts. So they vote with their feet, dating and sexing these young women, but refusing to marry them and refusing to give them their sperm. The masculists go further than the MGTOW, who merely passively walk away from marriage and paternity, choosing to spend their money on themselves, allowing them to live alternative lifestyles, able to work, save and invest hard in their younger decades, and then to retire in their 40s, spending the rest of their lives doing what they want to do, freed of the man-slavery of working for a fluffy parasite, and freed of the wage slavery of working for an employer who dictates what the employee must do to earn his wage. The masculists are much more political than the apolitical, wimpy MGTOWs, the essential difference being that masculists fight current gender politics that is largely dominated by monoconscious feminists, that is, feminists who know nothing about masculism, so have not had their masculist consciousnesses raised, so are not bi-conscious, that is, have not had their feminist and masculist consciousnesses raised. Monoconscious feminists tend to be rather feminazi bitchy, since they are taught by feminism how men oppress women, but are taught nothing about the reverse case. Since they are monoconscious, that is, they are not bi-conscious. They know nothing about masculist ideas, so know nothing about how women oppress men, nor that women oppress men far worse than vice versa, since women's oppression of men is continuous and lasts decades, particularly referring to women's financial parasitism, not bothering to get a career-competent education, so live off the money and labour of a man for decades, thus manslaving him for decades, which is only one of the major gender crimes that women, particularly fluffy women, commit against men. The essential difference between the MGTOW and the masculists is that the masculists fight. The masculists have an ideology comparable to women's feminist ideology, that is, a set of feminist ideas on how men oppress women, that causes women to get angry once they have absorbed these ideas and have seen how men have oppressed women now and in the past. For example, rape, how men have blocked women from positions of real power, etc. The masculists now have their own ideology, their own set of gender political ideas that they are now starting to spread across the planet, that when absorbed by millions of men cause them to become angry at women for the many ways that women oppress men, particularly regarding what women are doing to men in the divorce courts, and women's awful hypocrisy when faced with the masculist demand on women to FIP up, that is, become FIPs, financially independent persons, by bothering to get a career-competent education, so that as an adult, a FIP woman can pull her financial weight and not expect to parasite off the money and labour of a man. Thus the masculists have now their own gender political ideology and are now starting to spread it across the planet through the empowering of the individual, allowing an individual man in his living room in front of his web camera to film and upload a video of him expressing his masculist opinions, whether in an ad-lib speech format or read aloud from a script or essay, etc. The masculists are now on the cusp of launching an onslaught on the fluffy feminists who have taken over the divorce courts and made them so toxic for men that they have become indirect genociders, since they have made divorce so toxic for men that they have made marriage and paternity toxic for men. Since now in many countries 2/3 of young men are living the MGTOW lifestyle, the birth rate has plummeted. If the gender laws are not soon men-fared, For example, the divorce courts are men-fared. The para, that's paternity rejection right, is legislated, etc. Then the percentage of men rejecting marriage and paternity will surpass 90% within a decade, in which case whole populations will be wiping themselves out in a mere generation or so. This makes the fluffy feminists indirect genociders, since it is they who have made marriage and paternity so toxic for men. So not surprisingly, millions of men in many countries now are wiping their hands of marriage and paternity and going their own way. That is, they adopt the MGTOW philosophy and spit at marriage and having kids. The masculists are a lot more political than the passive, apolitical, wimpy MGTOWs, and are gearing up for a fight, an onslaught against the fluffy feminist hypocrites, using their superior male intelligence and verbal violence to crush them and to force society to men-fair the gender laws so that men are prepared to be fathers again. The masculists aim to put a masculist group in every high school, every campus, so that young men can first have their masculist consciousnesses raised by being exposed to masculist arguments, and then to get angry at how women oppress men, especially in the divorce courts, and finally to take action, forcing women to fip up, to push women to vote with men for the men-fairing of the gender laws, since men have the financial power to force women to fip up. A fluffy can only be a fluffy if she can get her financial claws into some gullible manslave who has not yet had his masculist consciousness raised, who still believes his role in life is to be a manslave to a bloody fluffy parasite, who bribes him with a bit of sex each blue moon to work for her, pay for her, so she can sit on her fat parasitic ass living in a middle-class house, raising her, in capital letters, kids, and having him, in capital letters, pay for it all. The masculists see the 2020s as the decade of men's lib, of masculism, equivalent to what happened to women in the late 1960s, when second-wave feminism motivated women to stop being housewives, who now had the pill, who could reliably control the number of kids they wanted, who found they had time in their hands once their few kids were off to kindergarten, so streamed into the workforce. Women today are accustomed to having a monopoly on gender political issues. They have had this monopoly for over half a century, with men usually slinking away in the face of a feminist tirade at the ways that men oppress women. Women, that is feminists, have invented their own gender political ideology over the decades, so are intellectually armed with these feminist ideas that they use to great effect when angered, hurling feminist abuse at men when these feminists feel the need. However, thanks now to the rise of masculist ideology, these monoconscious feminists no longer have that monopoly. From now on, the feminists will be forced by the masculists to share the gender political stage with them. And since the masculists are men, the masculists will soon take over that stage, the way that men take over everything, since women cannot compete with men at the top end of the performance scale. The masculists are now primed, armed with their masculist ideas and rhetoric, to restore the gender political pendulum to its lowest position, by making society conscious that women oppress men too, and that unless the gender laws are soon men-fared, whole populations will be wiped out, making the fluffy feminist hypocrites indirect genociders who have to be stopped, with bullets if necessary, since peoples go to war when their very survival is threatened. This is the end of part 1.